In South's publishing world, a curse had long been whispered about. The celebrated debut novel, Silence of Snow, by the prodigy writer Gao Zhouyuan, was not fiction at all, but a true account of his mother's life before her suicide. He rose to the top by consuming his mother's death, only to fall into 5 years of silence and creative paralysis. Cleo James, a black translator fluent in 5 languages, burst into Editor Park's office and slammed a set of sample pages onto the desk. Gao Zhouyuan left a posthumous copyright clause in his new book. "If I can translate the suicide note he hid in his punctuation," she said, "you let me be his sole translator." Gao Zhouyuan proused. Greed flashed in Editor Park's eyes. "He's a madman. You're a gambler." Cleo replied coolly. "I'm not translating words. I'm dismantling a bomb in his soul. It's what he owes his mother, and what he owes the world."
Snow fell over Peng Cheng as if it meant to bury the entire world.
Cleo James stood outside the cold iron Aikido of Ink Mountain Estate, feeling herself slowly turn into a black statue of ice. The wind hurled icy grains at her face like knives. She pulled her thin coat tighter, but the white mist of her breath was torn away instantly. This place really was like its owner, keeping everyone at a distance. She raised the photocopied manuscript toward the unremarkable security camera by the gate. She had been standing there for 2 hours already. "Mr. Gao Zhouyuan," she said into the intercom, her voice hoarse from the cold but steady. "I know you can hear me. I know you're watching." Only the wind answered. Cleo took a deep breath. Ordinary pleas wouldn't work here. To deal with a man who had turned himself into an island, she had to think like a madman. "Your new book." "Page 42, she said slowly. "That page is blank." Editor Park thinks it's a quirk, an artistic pause. "He's wrong." She stared at the black lens of the camera, as if she could see the dark eyes behind it. "That is an empty space. It's the moment your mother stopped breathing, the single second when the world went silent in your ears. You used a full blank page to mark that endless suffocation. Am I right?" A faint crackle of static came through the intercom, like someone flinching on the other end. She had it. Seconds later, the heavy iron gate, almost fused with the snowy mountain, let out a low rumble and slowly opened inward. A pristine path, blanketed in white, stretched toward a shadowed Korean-style estate. Cleo didn't hesitate. She stepped inside. The entryway was dim. A figure stood in the shadows, as if grown from the darkness itself. He wore plain hanbok, his frame painfully thin, as though a gust of wind could knock him over. Yet he stood like a mountain, radiating a silent, juju-like pressure. This was Gao Zhouyuan, the genius who had climbed to fame by feeding on his mother's death, and been trapped by it for 5 years. His face was pale, almost translucent. His eyes were deep and dry, like abandoned wells. He looked at Cleo without curiosity, only cold scrutiny and suspicion. "Did Editor Park send you?" he finally asked, his voice colder than the snow outside. "Here, to pry into my family's disgrace, or to steal my new work and calculate its market value?" His words struck like poisoned ice. Cleo sneered inwardly. As expected, this man had turned the whole world into his enemy. "Editor Park is a greedy businessman. I don't work for him," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm just a translator, one who can read you."
"Read me?"
Gao Zhouyuan scoffed, curling his lips in mockery. "A foreigner who can't even find an English equivalent for Zhong dares to say she understands me."
Je
It was a sharp question that the very wall every translator of Eastern literature eventually hit. You're right. English doesn't have zhong, Cleo said calmly. But I can read something more universal in your writing. Something you think you've hidden well, yet screams from every punctuation mark, desperate cries for help. Gao Zhouyuan's pupils shrank. He slowly raised his hand and caught a snowflake drifting from the eaves. It rested in his icy palm without melting, its crystallized shape intact. His heart was the same, frozen long ago. Watching him, Cleo sighed inwardly. This man had armored himself completely. You don't really want to die? She said suddenly. His hand froze. If you did, you would have died 5 years ago. You would have written this new book, let alone left so many clues behind, like a stubborn child throwing message bottles into the sea, desperate to be found, yet arrogant enough to hope no one ever does. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. You don't, Zhouyan, to die. Gao Zhouyan, you just want someone who can hold all your pain without dropping it. Someone who can say, it's okay, I understand. His body went taut like a drawn bow. He stared at her as waves of emotion surged in his eyes. This woman. How dare she? How could she see so clearly? At last, the snowflake in his palm melted into a single drop of icy water. He turned slightly and stepped aside, clearing the way to the study.
My book will have only one translator,
He said hoarsely. During the translation, one wrong word, one wrong punctuation mark, one bit of your self-righteous interpretation, and you're out.
Deal?
Cleo answered without hesitation. She passed by him and stepped onto the untouched snow leading into his forbidden inner ground. Her foot crunched softly, as if something long sealed had finally cracked open. Gao Zhouyan's study was less a study than a tomb built from books and manuscripts. The air was thick with sandalwood, mixed with the smell of old paper and ink, so heavy it was hard to breathe. Cleo and Gao Zhouyan sat facing each other at opposite ends of a massive wooden desk, thick stacks of manuscript spread across its surface.
They had been working like this in silence for 3 hours.
Aside from the soft rustle of turning pages and the faint scratch of pen on paper, there was no other sound. Gao Zhouyan was like a statue without emotion, eyes fixed on his words, as if everything around him had ceased to exist. Cleo, meanwhile, compared the original text while typing rapidly on her laptop.
Her professionalism let her slip quickly into focus, but her senses could not ignore the sadness saturating the room.
Gradually, she discovered something startling. When Gao Zhouyan described the suffering his mother endured, the daily grinding humiliations that wore a person down, his Gao Zhou carried a rhythm, short bursts, pauses, then a release, a cadence uncannily similar to a form of music Cleo knew all too well. It was the underlying rhythm of the blues. The rawest, heaviest kind of lament, born from cotton fields and blood-soaked oppression. How was that possible? How could a writer raised in Korea, without any guidance, grasp the soul of the blues? Cleo stopped typing and looked up at the man across from her.
This passage of yours,
she said at last, breaking the long silence. Its rhythm, it's a lot like the blues. Gao Zhouyan lifted his head from the manuscript, irritation and wariness flashing in his eyes. Blues, Sid. He repeated the word, in distance, clear in his voice. I don't listen to that kind of thing. You don't have to, Cleo said, meeting his gaze. Because you're living it. This rhythm of pain is carved into the bones, It belongs to every soul that's been crushed by life again and again, and still manages to grow. Gao Zhouyuan's expression darkened. Don't use your cheap foreign cultural theories to explain my family, he said coldly. You have no idea what that deep-rooted guilt and self-punishment mean in an Eastern household. There it was again, that cultural wall, that arrogance of exclusion. Cleo didn't get angry. She simply picked up a page of the manuscript, one of the most painful sections describing his mother just before her mental collapse. She looked out the window. Rain washed over the glass, as if trying to scrub the whole world clean. She didn't cry. She just sat there, day after day, until the light inside her was completely extinguished by the endless rain.
Cleo.
Ornate, you read the original softly in Korean. Then, almost without thinking, she rendered it into English on the spot. She stared out the window as rain washed the world away. No tears, just sitting, day after day, until the light inside her was not just dimmed, but utterly drowned by the endless rain. She didn't choose ornate language. She used the simplest, most direct words to recreate that waterlogged, suffocating despair. More importantly, the way she spoke, the drawn-out phrasing, the mournful cadence, was unmistakably a blues melody. The study fell silent again. Gao Zhouyuan's grip on his pen tightened without him realizing it. She was right. The grief he had never voiced aloud had been sung back to him by this foreign woman, in a language and rhythm utterly unfamiliar to him. Pain, it turned out, was a universal language. After that, the atmosphere of their work shifted in subtle ways. He no longer treated her purely as a tool. Occasionally, during proofreading, he would, as Chula, tell a question or two about English usage. When he handed a manuscript back to her once, their fingers brushed by accident. Cleo felt the chill of his fingertips. Gao Zhouyu, as if burned, instinctively tried to pull back, but this time he hesitated for a fraction of a second. He didn't move away immediately. That brief contact was like a weak electric current flashing between them. Before the ambiguous tension could deepen, it was shattered by a disturbing discovery. While organizing a stack of old drafts, Cleo accidentally touched a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf. It popped open. Inside was no treasure, only a black notebook. Curious, she opened it. On the first page, written in neat handwriting, were the words "Snowbound Silence, Translation Progress and the Time of the End." Below was a detailed plan. "Answer me." Gao Zhouyuan's voice shot up like a wounded beast pushed past its limit. The suffocating atmosphere in the study ignited at once, the air thick with tension. Cleo stood up and met his furious stare without flinching. "A will that die, Gao Zhouyuan, that's not courage, that's cowardice. You just want to run away in a way that looks noble." "What do you know?" Gao Zhouyuan snapped, his chest heaving. "This is my work, my pain, my ending. You're just a translator, a hired tool." "What right do you have to interfere with my choices? A tool." The word stung. Cleo let out a cold laugh. "If I were just a tool, I'd do exactly what Editor Park wants. Translate every desperate word you wrote, then wait for you to die so this book can be sold as a tragic genius's final cry for a great price. Do you really think he's rushing you because he cares about your art? He's waiting for your death notice." Gao Zhouyuan froze. The anger in his eyes gave way to confusion. "What did you say?" "Why do you think I changed your words?" Cleo stepped closer, her voice tight with urgency. I'm not translating. I'm trying to save you, you idiot. You're so determined to die that you don't see the wolves outside, waiting to tear you apart and feast on your suffering. As they argued, neither noticed the study door quietly open a crack. Editor Park stood outside, a smug smile on his face. He listened to the argument, greed flickering in his eyes. The timing was perfect. He straightened his expensive suit and walked in, wearing a mask of concern and regret. Zhou Yuan? Miss Cleo? What's going on? Why are you arguing so fiercely?
Seeing him, Gao Zhouyun frowned even more. Not wanting an outsider to witness his loss of control, he turned to the window, presenting them with a cold, distant back. Editor Park immediately moved closer to Cleo and lowered his voice, adopting a conspiratorial tone. Miss Cleo, I know you mean well and want to guide him, but you must understand his mental state is unstable. He sighed as if helpless. To be honest, I came with a solution. I have connections to several Wall Street hedge funds. They're very optimistic about this book, but they have one requirement. The ending must be a happy one. Cleo frowned. A happy ending? With the tone of this book, how could that?
Nothing is impossible, Editor Park cut in, calculation flashing in his eyes. As long as you, my dear translator, adjust the ending a little, we can have him reconcile with his past and embrace a new life.
If you cooperate, the bonus they're offering is enough for you to buy an apartment in New York. Cleo stared at his fake smile, her stomach churning. So that was it. He wasn't just waiting for Gao Zhouyun to die, he was hedging his bets. If Gao Zhouyun died, he'd hide the tragic genius. If he lived, they'd force a cheerful ending and harvest another wave of profit.
Dead or alive, he planned to squeeze every last drop of value out of him.
And if I refuse? Cleo asked coldly.
The smile vanished from Editor Park's face. Miss Cleo, you're a smart woman. He pulled a document from his briefcase and tossed it onto the table. This is some information we've gathered about Gao Zhouyun's mother. True or not doesn't matter. What matters is that once this reaches the media, Gao Zhouyun and his so-called pure snow mother will be completely ruined.
Cleo picked up the document. One glance made her tremble with rage. It was filled with fabricated, disgusting accusations, turning a long-suffering woman into a depraved, unstable monster.
You're shameless. This is business, Editor Park said smugly. You have two choices. 1. Cooperate with me and we all get rich. 2. Refuse, and watch Gao Zhouyun and his mother's reputations be destroyed. Given his current mental state, who knows what might happen if he's pushed a little more.
This was no longer temptation. It was a naked threat. Cleo looked at the lonely figure by the window and made her decision. She couldn't let him be hurt again. She took a deep breath and forced a stiff smile. Fine, I agree, but I need time. Of course. Editor Park grinned like a cat that had stolen cream. I'll be waiting at the hotel down the mountain. I hope you'll convince our genius writer as soon as possible. As he turned to leave, Cleo quietly tapped the stop button on the recording app in her pocket. She had agreed only to stall him. But she didn't see that when Editor Park said we all get rich, Gao Zhouyuan's body by the window suddenly stiffened. He had heard only part of the conversation. He heard, get rich. He heard Cleo say, I agree. In his ears, everything twisted into something else. So all her earlier words had been an act. Saving you all was feeding on your suffering, just negotiation tactics to raise her own price. She and Editor Park were on the same side. She was just another person exploiting his pain. A despair colder than betrayal, like being abandoned by the entire world, flooded over him. After Editor Park left,
The study sank into icy silence. Cleo wanted to explain, but when she saw Gao Zhuiyuan's bloodless face and the dead ash in his eyes, she knew nothing she said would be believed.
She needed proof. Proof of her innocence.
She returned to her room, quickly backed up the recording, then scribbled a note. Editor Park is threatening me. I have the recording on my phone. Don't believe him. Wait for me. She slipped back to the study and placed the note on his desk.
The moment she did, Gao Zhuiyuan turned sharply, grabbed the note, didn't even read it, and crushed it in his fist before throwing it into the trash.
That motion was like a blade, shredding Cleo's last shred of hope in the days to follow. They fell into a complete Cold War.
They worked in the same space but no longer spoke.
The study was blurred only with the sound of keyboards and strained breathing. Productivity dropped to rock bottom. Meanwhile, down the mountain, dark currents were already stirring. Through bought-off media outlets, Editor Park began spreading rumors that Gao Zhuiyuan was mentally unstable and on the verge of collapse. Speculation and malice quickly spread. Late one night, Cleo was awakened by a noise. She stepped out and saw the light still on in the study. Moving quietly, she peered through the door and saw Gao Zhuiyuan sitting alone on the floor, a half-finished bottle of whiskey in front of him. In his hand he clutched a yellowed old photograph. It was a photo of his mother. He stared at it, his eyes hollow, murmuring to himself. Suddenly, as if he had made a decision, a wild, resolute light flashed through his gaze. An urge to destroy everything grew rapidly within him. Cleo's heart tightened with dread.
What was he about to do?
The next morning, the moment Cleo stepped into the study, she sensed something was wrong. Gao Zhuiyuan sat at the desk with his back to her. He looked as if his soul had been drained, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. A document lay in front of him. Cleo walked closer, and her pupils shrank. It was a forged copyright transfer agreement. Her signature was right there, selling all overseas rights to Snow Silence at an absurdly low price to a shell company controlled by Editor Park. Editor Park did this. That despicable man. I didn't sign this, Cleo said urgently. Gao Zhuiyuan, it's forged. He's trying to drive a wedge between us. Gao Zhuiyuan slowly turned around. There was no expression on his face, not even anger, only a bone-deep ash-gray calm. Does it still matter? Gao Zhuiyuan is forged. He's trying to drive a wedge between us. Gao Zhuiyuan slowly turned around. There was no expression on his face, not even anger, only a bone-deep ash-gray calm. Does it still matter? He said softly, his voice drifting like smoke. Businessmen, liars, saviors, you're all the same. You all want something from me. He stood up and looked around the study, a room filled with his devotion and his pain. His mother's belongings were here. 5 years of manuscripts were here. His entire life was here. And now all of it felt filthy, tainted by money, tainted by lies, tainted by his own self-righteous idea of salvation. He looked hollow and bleak. Let it all end. He picked up the lighter on the desk and flicked it on. An orange flame danced at his trembling fingertips. Then he walked toward the massive bookshelf by the wall, where all the original drafts of Snow Silence were stored, along with every keepsake his mother had left behind. No, Cleo cried out. But it was too late. Gao Zhuiyuan brought the flame to the corner of the manuscripts. The dry paper caught instantly, the fire racing upward, greedily devouring the words that carried all his suffering. The flames spread with terrifying speed, quickly igniting the curtains and the wooden shelves. Thick smoke rolled out, and the study was swallowed by fire in an instant. Gao Zhou-yuan stared at her in shock. "Are you insane? Get out now." "Are you insane? Are you insane? Get out now." Gao Zhou-yuan stared at her in shock. "Are you insane? Get out now." Gao Zhou-yuan stared at her in shock. "Are you insane? Get out now." They went tired. Gao Zhou-yuan ignored him. She knew exactly what she was after. She didn't try to save the manuscripts that Editor Park saw as priceless. She ran to another corner of the room. There, a photo frame was being licked by fire. She lunged forward without hesitation and snatched it up before it was completely consumed. The glass was searing hot, burning her palm. Enduring the pain, she smashed the glass and pulled out the photo inside. It was the only photograph Gao Zhou-yuan's mother had left behind. The woman in the picture didn't look worn down by sorrow as she was described in his writing. Instead, she wore a shy, gentle smile, her face from a time when life hadn't yet erased all her light. Just then, a harsh cracking sound came from above. A burning beam, trailing sparks and smoke, was collapsing straight toward Cleo Jojo. "Watch out!" Gao Zhou-yuan shouted, his eyes splitting with panic. He tried to rush forward, but the flames blocked his way. In that split second, Cleo didn't dodge. She spun around and took the falling beam squarely on her back. Bang! Her body shuddered violently. A muffled cry escaped her lips, but she didn't fall. With the last of her strength, she clutched the photo to her chest and shoved it inside her clothes, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. In the leaping firelight, Gao Zhou-yuan saw everything. He froze as if his blood had turned to ice. She didn't save the manuscripts, she saved his mother's photo. Why would she do that? Why would she rather be hurt and let that picture burn? A wild, unbelievable thought exploded in his mind. Was I really wrong? How Cleo's body swayed. At last she could no longer hold on and slowly collapsed to her knees. In the final moment before smoke and flames swallowed her consciousness, she gathered all her strength and shouted to him, "That's your mother's. Only smile. Don't burn it." Before the words fully fell, she collapsed, unconscious. It felt as if the entire world collapsed before Gao Zhou-yuan's eyes. He looked at Cleo lying in the fire, at the shocking wound on her back, then at the inferno he himself had started to bury everything. A wave of regret and terror, unlike anything he had ever felt, crashed over him. He wanted to die, but in that moment, as he looked at the woman who risked everything to protect a trace of his mother's smile, that desire to die was replaced, for the first time, by something stronger. He wanted to live. He had to save her. He had to get them out of this hell he created, alive. Outside the door, Editor Park listened to the crackling flames and the sounds of collapses.
仍在大. A cold, satisfied smile appeared on his face. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "You can start preparing the press release," he said. "Earthrighted, the genius writer, Gao Zhou-yuan, suffered a mental breakdown, set fire to his own study, and died among his books. Oh, and there was also an unnamed foreign female translator who unfortunately perished with him." He hung up and turned to leave. Let it burn. The cleaner it burned, the better. Old sins would be reduced to ash, and new wealth was about to be born. The sharp smell of disinfectant replaced smoke and scorched metal.
Guy Zhou-yuan opened his eyes to a ceiling of pure white. He tried to move, and a tearing pain surged through his body. His throat burned, raw from smoke inhalation. He had survived. He suddenly sat up, ignoring the nurse's protests, and scanned the room in a panic. "Where is she? That woman?" His voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. "Do you mean the black lady?" the nurse asked quickly, trying to calm him. "She's in the next ward. Second-degree burns on her back and some soft tissue injuries, but her life isn't in danger. She's already out of the critical phase." Only then did the weight-crushing Gao Zhou-yuan's chest finally ease. He forced himself out of bed and staggered toward the next room. Through the glass window in the door, he saw Cleo lying on a hospital bed, asleep on her stomach. Thick bandages covered her back, faint blood seeping through. Her face was pale, but her breathing was steady. Gao Zhou-yuan stood there for a long time, staring at her. The image of her shielding the photograph with her own back in the flames replayed in his mind again and again, branded into him. He had been wrong, completely, unforgivably wrong. He had pushed away the one person who tried to pull him out of the abyss, and with his own hands sent her into hell. The crushing guilt and lingering fear nearly made him collapse. Just then, his doting physician approached and handed him a phone sealed in an evidence bag, its casing blackened by soot.
"Mr. Gao, this was found at the fire scene. It should belong to that lady."
"The shell is damaged, but the memory card seems intact." Gao Zhou-yuan took it, his fingers trembling. He remembered the note he had torn to pieces.
"The recording is on my phone. I may need this to the media. Gao Zhou-yuan took a lady as mother."
"In photo frame is Byron, alive. Master boss some attached needs."
"This is some information we've dug up about Gao Zhou-yuan's mother. If I leak this to the media, Gao Zhou-yuan, this so color pure as snow mother, will be ruined instantly. Work with me and we get rich together. Or stand by and watch him be completely destroyed."
Then came Cleo's makeup.
Then came Cleo's.
Then came Cleo's. Gao's stiff voice, anger tightly restrained. "I agree." The truth revealed itself in the cruelest, clearest way possible. She hadn't betrayed him. She had been pretending. She wasn't a profiteer. She was undercover. She had been carrying threats and misunderstandings alone, standing between him and the world's malice.
And he had repaid her protection with the cruelest words and the most final rejection.
Gao Zhou-yuan sat there, listening to Editor Park's smug laughter, his blood seeming to freeze. After a long while, he slowly raised his head. The last traces of despair and confusion in his eyes were replaced by a sharp, blade-like light he had never known before.
The writer Gao Zhou-yuan, who wanted to die, was gone. What remained was a man bent on revenge.
The next day, Gao Zhou-yuan did something decisive. He asked the nurse for scissors and, facing the mirror, cut off the long hair he had kept for 5 years, hair that symbolized his decay and escape. In the mirror stood a man with sharp eyes and defined features, both unfamiliar and familiar. When he entered Cleo's ward, she was already awake, struggling to change her dressing by herself. "Don't move!" Gao Zhou-yuan walked over and took the cotton swabs and ointment from her hands. His voice was still hoarse, but firm beyond argument. He helped her lie still and carefully removed the old bandages, revealing a shocking wound. The burned skin was red and swollen, blistered in places. For the first time his hands did not shake. He lowered his head, dipped the swab into the ointment and applied it gently, bit by bit. His movements were focused and reverent, as if restoring a priceless treasure. Cleo lay with her face turned to the pillow, feeling his warm breath brush the back of her neck. She said nothing, only quietly accepting the clumsy yet tender pressure of his fingers.
"I'm sorry,"
he finally said, his voice deep, like the low string of a cello.
"The one you should apologize to isn't me."
Cleo replied,
gasped softly. It's that photograph. And yourself? Gao Zhouyuan's hand paused. The photo, I got it back. From his pocket, he carefully took out the photograph. One corner scorched black, the smile still clear. He placed it beside her pillow. Thank you, he said. No more words were needed between them. One fire and one brush with death had forged a bond beyond language, solid and unbreakable. Editor Park thinks we're both dead, Gao Zhouyuan said calmly as he wrapped fresh bandages around her back. He's definitely moving on to his next plan. This is our best chance. What do you want to do?
Cleo asked. The book isn't finished yet. Flames of revenge flickered in Gao Zhouwen's eyes. The ending won't be death, and it won't be a fake happy ending. It will be judgment. Over the next few days, the small hospital room became their secret war room. They played along with the lie, having the hospital seal off information and spread the illusion that Gao Zhouwen was gravely injured, unconscious, his fate uncertain. Under that cover, they raced against time to complete the final chapter of The Silence of Snow. Gao Zhouwen dictated while Cleo typed and translated at lightning speed on her laptop. His thoughts had never been clearer. The words were no longer cries of despair, but poisoned blades aimed straight at human greed and the ugliness of capital. During that time, a small incident caught Cleo's attention. She noticed that whenever Gao Zhouwen rested, he would quietly take out a basic English conversation guide and awkwardly practice pronunciation.
What are your...
So doing, he reads slowly from the book, his expression serious, like a grade school student. Watching his focused profile, something inside Cleo softened completely. This man, who couldn't be bothered to explain the word love to a foreigner, was now learning a new language for her. Meanwhile, Seoul's publishing world and financial circles were lost in an early celebration.
Editor Park's company stock was soaring, and the Wall Street investors had their champagne ready. Everyone believed victory was certain, that a feast of traffic and fortune was just ahead.
They had no idea that two wounded beasts crawling back from hell had already sharpened their claws and were waiting quietly for the moment to step onto the Grand Hyatt Seoul's ballroom glittered with light, a sea of elegant dresses and tailored suits. Beneath massive crystal chandeliers, media outlets, critics, and publishers from around the world gathered. Camera flashes went off non-stop, turning the hall as bright as day. This was the global launch of Snow's Silence, and also a grand memorial for the deceased genius writer Gao Zhouyuan. At center stage, Editor Park stood under the spotlight in a perfectly tailored black suit, his face arranged into just the right degree of grief. His voice was heavy, carefully emotional.
Today, we gather with profound sorrow to remember the fall of a literary giant. He went on at length about his deep friendship with Gao Zhouyuan, about the writer's nearly unhinged creative state. With practiced skill, he packaged Gao's supposed death as a tragedy of genius crushed by the weight of life, turning the book launch into flawless, scandal-driven marketing. He used his life to complete this
final masterpiece. Snow's silence is not just a book. It is his burning soul, Editor Park declared passionately. The audience responded with sighs and applause. The greedy vultures were already eager to feast. Satisfied with the reaction, Editor Park prepared to announce the official release of the book. At that moment, the heavy double doors of the ballroom slowly opened from the outside.
The blinding flashes instantly swung toward the entrance. Everyone
Cleopatra James, the female translator, rumored to have gone down with him, was pushing a wheelchair as she entered. Seated in it was a man in a plain hospital gown, his head wrapped in bandages. But that face, those eyes, every Korean reporter present recognized them instantly. It was Gao Zhouyuan. He was alive. The room exploded. Reporters surged forward like sharks scenting blood, flashes firing so fast they made people dizzy.
Mr. Gao, you are alive. What really happened in the fire?
What is your relationship with Editor Park? The grief on Editor Park's face hardened into pure shock and terror. He stared at the man who should have been in a morgue, moving closer and closer, his heart pounding in his ears.
This is impossible, security.
Where is security? Security, we shrieked, words tumbling over each other. Cleopatra pushed the wheelchair to the end of the red carpet and stopped, under the gaze of the entire world. Gao Zhouyuan slowly stood up. His body was still weak, but his back was straight.
He took the microphone Cleopatra handed him and looked past the chaos of reporters, locking his gaze on the man on stage whose face had gone deathly pale.
I'm sorry to disappoint everyone. His voice was hoarse, yet through the speakers it carried clearly to every corner of the hall.
First, I'm not dead, the audience erupted.
Second, he paused, then turned to Cleopatra beside him. For the first time a trace of warmth appeared in his otherwise icy eyes. I've changed translators. The woman beside me, Miss Cleopatra James, is the only legal English translator of Snow's silence. The words landed like a sharp slap across Editor Park's face. He completely lost his composure, trying to rush off the stage to stop the spectacle spiraling, only to be firmly restrained by hotel security, who had been waiting nearby. Let go of me! I'm the organizer of this event. What are you doing? Ha ha ha! He screamed, struggling wildly. Mr. Organizer, Cleopatra said, taking another microphone with a cool smile. Your performance is over. She stepped forward to stand beside Gao Zhouyuan and spoke in astonishingly fluent Korean, every word clear. Editor Park abused his position to fabricate scandals, threatening the author's family's reputation, coercing the translator to alter the work, and planning to exploit the author's suicide for profit-driven marketing. Without pause, she switched to English and repeated the statement for the foreign press. A bilingual verdict, each word cutting deep. Editor Park's face turned ashen. You're lying! What evidence do you have? He shouted, making a final, desperate attempt. Evidence! Zhouyuan let out a cold laugh and snapped his fingers. The massive LED screen behind the stage lit up. Instead of a promotional video for Snow's silence, surveillance footage began to play. It showed the corridor outside the study on the night of the Ink Mountain Estate fire. Flames raged inside the room, and outside the door stood Editor Park, a cruel smile on his face, calmly talking on his phone. He had watched without helping. The proof was undeniable. The climax hit.
Several investors who had moments ago been calling Editor Park a brother went pale. They stood up one after another and quietly slipped out through the back exit. One of them snarled at his assistant as he left. Nah, Dump every stock connected to that man immediately. Staring at his only image on the screen, Editor Park's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. He knew it was over. Uniformed police officers pushed through the crowd, stopped in front of him, and displayed their badges. Editor Park, you are suspected of document forgery, commercial fraud, and indirect intentional homicide. Please come with us. Under countless flashing cameras, the once powerful Editor Park was dragged off the stage he had so carefully built, utterly disgraced. The entire hall fell into a deeply satisfying, vengeful silence.
Standing amid the wreckage, Gaozhou Juwan tightly held Cleopatra's hand. The curtain on revenge had only just risen.
Go Editor Park's downfall hit like a bomb, triggering a violent shockwave through Seoul's publishing world and financial circles. The publishing house behind him was dragged under by the scandal. Its stock price hit the daily limit overnight. Investors and partners filed massive claims, and bankruptcy was announced soon after. The capital that had once colluded with him rushed to cut their losses, terrified of being pulled down as well. At the center of the storm stood Go-Go-Wan and Cleo. The same media outlets that had mocked, speculated, and spread rumors reversed their tone overnight. They lifted Cleo onto a pedestal, calling her the savior chosen by the god of literature, a whistleblower who exposed the darkness, and a translator who defended justice with her life. Cleo only smiled at the praise. What she cared about more was the change in Go-Go-Wan. After spending more time recovering in the hospital, Go-Go-Wan took the initiative to hold a press conference. This time, but it was no grand stage and no flashing lights. It was just him, calmly facing every camera. For the first time, he publicly and completely told his mother's story. He did not avoid the pain or the ugliness, nor did he soften any details. He admitted that part of his mother's tragedy came from the constraints of family, and part of it from his own cowardice and lack of understanding when he was young. For the past 5 years, I've lived in shame and guilt. I thought writing her story was exploiting her, a kind of betrayal, he said. His voice was steady, but every word carried weight. But now I understand. True remembrance isn't hiding pain, it's letting it be seen and understood. I'm no longer ashamed of my mother's story. I'm proud of her. When he finished, he stood and bowed deeply. In that moment, the demons that had haunted him for years finally dissolved. He felt a release he had never known before. After the press conference, Go-Juan and Cleo worked together through legal Go-Juan to reclaim all the rights to Snowfall Silence from the bankrupt publisher. They chose a new, reputable publishing house and replanned the book's release in a way that truly respected the author and the story itself.
On the day of the new book launch, Go-Juan did something no one expected in front of the media.
He didn't talk about literature or about writing. Instead, he tightly held Cleo's hand beside him and said earnestly to every camera, "Without her, there would be no Snowfall Silence, and there would be no me standing here today. She is not my translator. She is my soulmate." Those words were more powerful than any marketing campaign. Not long after, from his prison cell, Editor Park saw the news on television. Snowfall Silence was selling worldwide and sweeping major bestseller lists. In the report, Go-Juan and Cleo stood side by side, receiving praise from all over the world. Staring at the screen, regret, jealousy, and resentment twisted together inside him. The passion that broke out as a hoarse, desperate cry. He had lost completely and utterly. As time passed, the turmoil slowly faded. Ink Mountain Manor was restored, and the burned study was rebuilt, just as it had been.
The first thing Go-Juan did was place his mother's smiling photograph into a new frame. and hang it solemnly in the most visible spot in the study. Sunlight streamed through the window and fell on the photo, the smile warm and bright. That afternoon, as Cleo helped him sort through the manuscripts that had survived the disaster, Go Juan suddenly spoke.
Let's leave this place. Cleo was surprised. Leave? Go where? To your hometown. Go Juan looked at her, anticipation and longing in his eyes. I want to see what kind of place could give birth to a soul as brave and passionate as yours. I want to look for new inspiration.
Cleo smiled. She knew it wasn't just about inspiration.
This was him wanting to step into her world.
All right, she said. But I should warn you, Brooklyn, New York isn't anywhere near as quiet as these snowy mountains.
I know.
Go Juan smiled too. It was the first truly light, heartfelt smile he'd had in a long time. I think I need a little noise. As they packed and prepared to leave Korea, Go Juan quietly began writing a new book. The opening had only one line. She translated my life. Before that, I thought it was an indecipherable mess of symbols. He had already chosen the title. The translator.
New York, Brooklyn. Unlike Pyeongchang, with its all-consuming whiteness and deadly silence, everything here was alive and loud. The sunlight was golden, pouring generously over red brick walls and graffiti. The air carried the scent of a corner pizza shop, the rumble of the subway, and, somewhere in the distance, a saxophone full of improvisation.
Gao Zhou-yuan stood by the window of Cleo's apartment, watching the steady flow of people on the street below, different skin tones, different languages, brushing past one another, every face wearing a kind of unapologetic vitality.
He felt as if he jumped straight out of a black and white silent film into an IMAX movie with the saturation turned all the way up.
A little overwhelming, but not unpleasant.
How does it feel, our god of literature? Cleo walked over with 2 cups of coffee and gently bumped into him from behind. It's loud, Gao Zhouyuan said honestly. Then he added, but it's a living kind of loud. Cleo handed him a cup. Come on, I'll take you somewhere. Let me show you what it means to sing your pain out loud.
She took him to a jazz club hidden in a basement.
It was small, dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and cigars. On stage, an elderly black woman stood with her eyes closed, singing the blues in a voice warmed by time and life. The melody was almost exactly the same as the tune Cleo had once hummed in his study.
The lyrics were simple. Loss, waiting, endless nights.
But the emotion in that voice was like a hammer, striking Gao Zhouyuan's heart again and again. And suddenly he understood. Pain didn't have to be expressed through silence or self-destruction. It could be sung. Once it was sung, someone else could hear it. And once it was heard, you could dance together.
When the sun...
Getty! The room erupted in applause and whistles. Glasses were raised, laughter rang out, as if all the sorrow in the song had evaporated into the air with the final note. Looking at those vivid, smiling faces, Gao Zhouyuan felt, for the first time, that pain had more than one way out.
From that day on, the man who had once been fixated on dying began, clumsily, to learn how to live.
Cleo took him grocery shopping, teaching him the names of spices and vegetables he had never seen before. He stepped into a kitchen for the first time, trying to make a simple tomato pasta. He ended up covered in sauce, a complete mess, which earned him Cleo's merciless laughter. She dragged him along to her family gatherings. A group of warm, boisterous relatives surrounded him, greeting him loudly, patting his shoulders, firing off questions that left him at a loss.
Hey, kid. You're Cleo's genius writer boyfriend. Can you dance? Come on, move with the rhythm.
Try my fried chicken. It's a family recipe. Overwhelmed by this tornado of enthusiasm, Gao Zhouyuan instinctively wanted to retreat, to escape back to the quiet corner that used to be his world. But Cleo simply held his hand and whispered in his ear, "Don't be afraid. They just like you." He watched her relaxed, radiant smile among her family, watched her chubby aunt shove a plate piled high with barbecue into his hands, and suddenly he felt that being under siege like this wasn't so bad. At least it was warm. It was in this warm, noisy atmosphere that the new book he and Cleo were writing together, Spring After the Snow, Sigmaticen Aguro Fitro Simplace and then Sifrito Cleo Wise now watched her. At Loisbad has sporing snows, Simboin smile, the snow has piling overused for violent. At least it was warm. It was in this warm, noisy atmosphere that the new book he and Cleo were writing together, Spring After the Snow, finally began to take shape. He wrote about Korean snow, Cleo added Brooklyn sunshine. He wrote Eastern restraint and quiet endurance, Cleo brought in American directness and passion. Two completely different cultures and life experiences collided on the page, blending into something with a strange and wonderful chemistry. One night, Cleo came out of the shower and saw Gao Zhouyuan sitting on the edge of that, staring at her back. The scars there, after months of healing, were no longer as frightening as before, but that patch of pink, uneven skin remained, like a metal permanently etched into her body. Gao Zhouyuan reached out. His fingertips, trembling slightly, brushed over the scar. "Does it still hurt?" he asked softly. "No." Cleo turned around and cupped his face. "And honestly, I think it's kind of cool, like a tattoo." Gao Zhouyuan said nothing. He only lowered his head and placed an incredibly gentle, solemn kiss on the scar. It was a belated kiss, filled with guilt, gratitude, and love. In that moment, Cleo's heart was flooded with an overwhelming sense of tenderness and happiness.
The manuscript of Spring After the Snow drew huge attention in both Korea and the United States. Korean readers flooded his social media, urging him to come home, saying the Korean literary world couldn't be without him. Gao Zhouyuan looked at the messages, smiled, then closed the laptop. Turning to Cleo, who was reading nearby, he said, "The weather's nice today. Let's go for a walk downstairs." To him, all the praise in the world meant nothing compared to walking with Cleo under the Brooklyn sun. He had already found his spring. The translation of the final chapter was about to be completed. Neither of them knew that within it lay a final secret waiting to be revealed.
On the day Spring After the Snow was released worldwide, it caused a huge sensation. The cover design was striking. Half snow-covered mountains in Pyeongchang, half the streets of Brooklyn, and in the author line, two names were printed clearly: Gao Zhouyuan and Cleo James, not translator, co-authors. As readers dove in, many were delighted to discover that the special punctuation mark that had once, in Gao Zhouyuan's writing, represented death, endings, and suffocation, that blank pause, had been given an entirely new meaning in this book. It was no longer empty.
Every time it appeared, it was printed as a tiny, almost unnoticeable heart symbol.
Suppose if this small change, like a sweet Easter egg, made everyone who knew their stories smile to themselves.
The former code for death had become a mark of love. After the noise of the book launch faded, life returned to calm. That afternoon, Cleo sat at her desk as usual, doing the final round of proofreading for the entire book. It was a profound
Gaozhou habit of hers, and also her personal ritual of saying goodbye to a piece of writing. Everything went smoothly until she turned to the very last page of the manuscript. After the main text ended, beneath the heart symbol, there was a single handwritten line in English that did not belong to the book itself. The handwriting was a little clumsy, but every stroke was pressed down hard, careful, and sincere. It was Gaozhou Yuan's handwriting. It read, "Cleo, you translated my life. Now, will you co-author the rest of it with me? Marry me." Cleo's breathing stopped. She stared at the line again and again, afraid she had read it wrong. It wasn't printed type. It was real handwriting. It wasn't part of a novel. It was written for her. This book, from beginning to end, had been about redemption and rebirth, and on its very last page, it turned out to be a hidden love letter meant for her alone. It was his proposal. Tears fell without warning, large drops splashing onto the manuscript and blurring the ink. She wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed by a powerful, surging happiness that left her unable to speak through her tears. That man who had once been stingy with explanations, who had once shut the whole world out, used the language he had only just learned, still awkward to give her the most romantic and sincere promise of his life. Gaozhou Yuan came out of the kitchen and froze at the sight. He walked over, a little nervous, his voice carrying a trace of uncertainty. "You don't agree?" Mary Zhou Kao lifted her tear-streaked face to look at him, crying and laughing at the same time. She didn't answer. Instead, she sprang to her feet, threw her arms around his neck, and kissed him hard. This kiss was different from any before. It was filled with joyful tears, uncontrollable love, and every hope they held for the future. After a long moment, their lips parted. Cleo, breathing hard, rested her forehead against his and said hoarsely, "Yes, 1,000 times yes."
That evening, hand in hand, they walked onto the Brooklyn Bridge. The sunset painted the sky a warm orange. One by one, the lights on the bridge came on, like a brilliant river of stars. Gaozhou Yuan took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring with a very simple design. "I didn't know what you'd like," he said shyly. "This was the simplest design I could think of." Cleo looked at him and smiled. "You forgot I'm best at translating the most complicated meanings from the simplest to—"
Calling. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "You translated my life," Gaozhou Yuan said, holding her hand and carefully repeating the words from the manuscript. "Now please continue writing it." "With pleasure, my author," Cleo said, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his lips. Below them, traffic flowed endlessly. In the distance, the countless lights of New York burned through the night. Behind them, those who had once doubted and mocked them could now only look up at their happiness in the news and in bookstores. Gaozhou Yuan, who had once disliked Americans most of all, finding them loud and shallow, now willingly became a true New York son-in-law. "What shall we write next?" Cleo leaned against his shoulder, gazing at the night view. Gaozhou Yuan thought for a moment.
I heard from your relatives that Africa has many ancient stories. Maybe we could go there for inspiration. Sure, Cleo's eyes lit up. But before that, you'll need to learn how to survive the wedding interrogations from my 7 aunts and 8 great-aunts.
A look of mock pain crossed Gao Zhouyuan's face, but his eyes were full of unconcealed warmth and affection. A translation that once carried death finally came to a perfect close, with the sweetest love letter of all.
Mayo.
Gao 5 years later. Brooklyn, New York. A red brick house with a small yard. The afternoon sun filters through spotless glass windows, spilling into a spacious, bright study. The room is simply furnished, a massive work table, bookshelves lining 2 walls, and on the 3rd wall, a collage of everyday photographs and a child's crayon drawing. Gao Zhouyuan sits at one end of the table, quietly writing on manuscript paper. He is no longer as thin and shadowed as he once was. Time and happiness have softened his features, giving him a warmth he never used to have. Cleo sits at the other end, wearing blue light glasses, focused on her computer screen as she translates the words he has just written into English. Their way of working is still the same as it was years ago back in that study on the snowy mountain, but the air is no longer heavy with the scent of sandalwood and sorrow. Instead, it carries the aroma of coffee. And from outside the window come the sounds of children.
Language is no longer a barrier between them. Words that once stood for pain in death have now been precisely translated by love into rebirth and hope.
When they got married, they didn't hold a grand wedding. They simply exchanged vows on the Brooklyn Bridge.
And the wedding vows were taken from the opening and closing lines of Gao Zhouyuan's old suicide letter. The opening line was, "The fine snow covers everything in a white burial shroud." The closing line was, "The first snow has fallen, signaling that spring will begin anew." In this way, they said goodbye to the past and paid tribute to the future. The once cold and desolate Ink Mountain estate has also been transformed by them into a literary exchange center, freely open to talented young writers. Music and children's laughter are often heard there now. Daddy, Mommy, a little mixed-race girl with 2 braided pigtails and healthy wheat-colored skin runs in, clutching a ball. "Dum, dum, dum, are you done yet?"
"We're going to the park." Gao Zhouyuan immediately sets down his pen, a loving smile spreading across his face. "Just a moment, my little princess." He stands up, walks behind Cleo, and gives her shoulders a gentle, familiar squeeze. "Shall we stop here for today, Miss Translator? We're sick and ill on the cotton." Gao Zhou smiles as she saves the document. "As you wish, Mr. Full-Time Dad." Their story was bought by Hollywood 2 years ago for a film adaptation. The producers had only one condition. Cleo James herself had to serve as the film's cultural and translation consultant. Once revered by the Korean literary world as a god of literature, Gao Zhouyuan now finds his greatest joy in sharing newly learned recipes and moments from his daughter's daily life on social media.
His fans went from initial shock to complete acceptance, leaving comments like, "The god has stepped down from the altar and become an ordinary man. That's wonderful." After seeing that, Gao Zhouyuan replied, "I didn't step down. I found my human world."
Hand in hand, the 2 of them lead their daughter out of the house.
In the yard, the cherry tree they planted together in the snow when they first moved in is now lush and full. In spring, it bursts into brilliant blossoms. All the suffering, like winter snow, has
Nourish it away, seeping into the soil and becoming nourishment for life and creation. Love is the only language in this world that needs no translation, yet can be understood by everyone. In the glow of the setting sun, the silhouettes of the family of three stretch long, frozen into a warm and eternal picture. Life ikankappt. Internally occupied, unspeakable